Hey, I'm Mekkah, and I usually make videos about Fire Emblem. In this video, I'm going to discuss the events that took place in the Fire Emblem community around July 2020. It's not going to be a fun or positive video, but I believe I need to make this, and I think what I have to say is important for everyone, especially those within the Fire Emblem and Advance Wars communities. That said, this is going to deal with some heavy topics that might be traumatizing to some people. These topics are on your screen right now. I will not show any graphic pictures of any of these things during this video, but I will discuss them. If it's easier for you to read all this instead of listening to it, I will provide a text version instead. And if you would prefer to stop watching, now is probably the time. This video is long, so I'm going to just outright state the most important points right here and support them elaborately later. If you want to have an informed opinion on these complex events, if you want to help me fight the huge amount of misinformation out there, I highly recommend watching the video completely. In 2019, Fire Emblem and Advance Wars YouTuber Mangs touched a woman in her sleep without her consent and lied about it afterwards. Before this, Mangs already had a history of abuse and predatory behavior towards women. When Mangs was finally held accountable by his victims, he gave a vague apology and left the internet, only to come back 1 month later with a return video that dismissed the situation to his audience as an act of cancel culture. Instead of providing evidence, context, and understanding, he relied on misinformation, manipulation, and lies to justify his abrupt return to his young and impressionable audience. One of the first people to come forward and openly support the victim was Chaz Allegations LLC, who was soon after accused of sexual coercion. However, when these allegations became public, the community connected their cases in a way that was not legitimate. Some people were less inclined to believe the allegations against Mangs because Chaz's legitimacy was suddenly called into question. It cast a smokescreen over the whole deal. It made the situation more confusing to those who were not involved. Because of that, many made a judgment call simply because they wanted the whole ordeal to be resolved. However, these two cases need to be seen as independent of each other, because they are. Even though these events took place in 2019 and 2020, the aftermath continues to affect several members of the Fire Emblem community, including me, to this day. That's why I felt like this video needed to be made, despite the fact that for a lot of people, these events may feel like a thing of the past. It also serves to inform those who missed them completely. And lastly, prolific community members such as YouTubers have power within the community, and that power is granted to them by their supporters. And if we do not hold these community members and their supporters accountable, bad things will happen. That is not cancel culture, that is part of keeping a community safe and healthy. All of this requires a lot of context, and that is what the rest of this video is going to provide. I'm going to start with my own personal history with Mangs, from when I first met him and started working with him, up until he was outed as a predator. This will serve as a background that explains various interactions and situations from my perspective, while reflecting on my thoughts and actions. However, I have put timestamps in the description that you can use to skip ahead at your own discretion. This next section also doubles as a way to answer the questions of people wondering why Mangs suddenly disappeared from my channel. At the risk of stating the obvious, this is not an exhaustive list of related events. It's not even close. It's just my point of view. The ripple effects of what happened reached out so far that it's not feasible to fit everything into this video, even if I knew it all. In addition, there are some things that I do know that I cannot divulge here because they are too personal for the people involved. While these bits are relevant, they are not mine to tell, and I'm not comfortable putting their names or information on display here, even though they support my arguments and immensely impact my feelings on the matter. This includes things I've discussed with my own friends, and even some things Mangs has told me in the past, things I know he has said and done. If any other people come forward with their own perspective and they seem legitimate, involved, and informed, I am willing to signal boost their stories. The reason I'm adding these qualifiers is because in situations like these, there is no such thing as an objective look at the situation by an unbiased party. Someone who was not involved at all is getting all their information from other people's perspectives, and they're not necessarily going to give you a more objective and accurate depiction of events. The opposite is more likely. That's not necessarily out of malice or bad faith. It's simply because they know less about the situation at hand than the people who are involved. Now, while most of the content of this video pertains to what happened in 2020, I believe it's important to start off in 2017 to cover the origins of my relationship with Mangs and how it developed up until then. Back then, I was basically a nobody. I had some small projects on my channel that I mostly did for myself. The only thing I was sort of known for was co-commentating Don's 0% Growth playthroughs. Somewhere during March 2017, I somehow caught wind of Mangs making a video where he mentioned me and Don. I think we were in the title of this video. I remember Mangs made fun of Don's video quality a bit, and as a friendly jab back, I made a little video making fun of Mangs' playstyle and commentary. He responded with a funny video of his own, and this went back and forth a couple of times, to the enjoyment of both of our audiences. Around this time, Mangs started a Fire Emblem 7 ranked run on his channel, and at my request, he brought me along for the ride from the second episode onwards. Like, I literally just DM'd him and asked him to bring me on. He would later describe our early cooperation as a little bit rough and that he wasn't sure if it would work out, but somewhere along the way we just clicked. It turned out that our personalities balanced each other very well. I was calm, analytical, maybe a bit dry, and Mangs was excited, chaotic, but maybe a bit too much. More importantly, Mangs was known as a player who made a lot of mistakes, sometimes to the frustration of his audience, who would comment on this behavior below the videos. I think it was a bit like watching a game of football and seeing the players fumble the ball over and over, people just screaming at the screen telling them to play better, or to the coach that they should sub that player for someone else. But now imagine that there's someone with Mangs that tells him off for his mistakes, live. He voices your frustration. That was a big part of the appeal I had for Mangs' audience, that I called him out on his mistakes and voiced their frustrations with him. It should be noted that at this point in time, Mangs and I were not friends yet. We'd get into a voice call, talk for maybe 10 minutes, record an episode, and then maybe talk a little more, but mostly about the game and the video. It was like being on a work shift with someone if you work in a restaurant or in retail or something. We didn't take the time to get close, but we had synergy when we were on the mic, and that's what mattered. This cooperation went on for a little bit, and as time passed by, we started talking more and more. I noticed that Mangs was a lot different when we were not recording. Off camera, he was a lot more relaxed, focused, reliable, precise. A lot of people will tell you what they think Mangs was like based on how he behaves on his streams and videos, but this was a side of him that you could almost never see if you only watched his content. Only occasionally could you catch this side on camera, and it was usually when he was answering questions from viewers after streams or in something like a Patreon Q&A. It confirmed to me that the chaotic Mangs you could see and hear in his videos was mostly an act, or perhaps just him leading into this side of himself a little more for entertainment. This also includes his act of being really thirsty for all sorts of Fire Emblem girls, most notably Louise from Fire Emblem 7. I want to stress that there is nothing wrong with behaving differently on and off screen. If you're an entertainer, then your job is to be entertaining, and if that requires you to act differently, perhaps emphasize a side of yourself that your audience responds positively to, then that's fine. Pretty much every YouTuber does this to an extent. This difference between camera Mangs and what I like to think of as real Mangs was the basis for my actions around August 2017. At this point in time, Mangs faced a big controversy on Twitter. He was being accused of coercing and blackmailing girls, even underage ones. People were saying Mangs was flirting with them, trying to get lewd pictures out of them, in exchange for his attention, or him prioritizing their Corans when he was doing a Coran Quest playthrough. I believe this is the first time I heard of Mangs doing anything like that, and I felt like I couldn't ignore it, so I tried to investigate. I wanted to know if it was true, because if it was, I wanted nothing to do with him anymore. Again, I did not consider us friends back then. I would consider us close colleagues. I talked to Mangs, and I talked to one of the girls who came forward against him. However, neither of them wanted this to become a big thing. What transpired between them had happened long ago, and they both just wanted to move on. I did get to see some logs that most of the public did not, and I drew my own conclusions from them. Initially, I was going to make a video about it, but since both Mangs and his victim did not want this to blow up, I settled for a Reddit post where I described what I found. Here's that Reddit post. There are a lot of things wrong with it though, and I don't stand by the conclusions that I drew back then. Using erroneous conclusions I drew for myself, I defended Mangs in this post. I said that he had made mistakes, but that he had learned from them. I explained that Mangs' on-screen personality had bled into his off-screen one, and that he knew better now. Because I had seen how Mangs acted off-screen, and I assumed that was the real him. I did not consider that maybe if this guy could act one way on camera and another off camera, he might act in a third different way when he's around someone else but me. But I defended Mangs passionately, and he was very grateful and said it really helped him. And from this moment onwards, our friendship grew more tight, and we worked together for a long time. In late 2018, Mangs made a video talking about every Fire Emblem YouTuber he knew, and he spent quite a lot of time discussing my channel, about how I'd grown a lot since I started out, how his views had been better ever since I started coming on, how he thought I would surpass him one day, how he enjoyed doing co-commentary with me, and how he hoped that we would end up playing the entire series together. He started making more appearances on my channel too. Our channels were practically intertwined. During this time, I got to know Mangs better. We talk back and forth almost every day for the purposes of recording or even just talking about other random Fire Emblem things. We had quite a few things in common, most importantly that we were both European dudes of similar age, in a world that was mostly focused on an American audience. Mangs had a lot of experience on YouTube, especially as a Fire Emblem YouTuber, and he was happy to share what he had learned over the years with me. He would answer simple questions like when and how often to upload and how to avoid certain mistakes people make, as well as how to go about recruiting people to help me out, like designers and editors. To say I learned a lot from him would be a huge understatement. In large, my channel is modeled after his. Like our contrasting gameplay approaches, we end up being polar opposites in many other ways, such as his huge love for eating meat while I've been a vegetarian for most of my life. We happily accepted these differences between us, and we enjoyed each other's company. This is just about all you need to know regarding the time between 2017 and March 2019. In May of 2019, a group of Fire Emblem YouTubers planned to get together for a convention called Anime North in Toronto. Among them are Mangs, Chaz Allegations LLC, Lucky Crit, Gast Station, also known as Fargast, and Goosephone. Mangs invited me to come along as well, but I declined since it would involve a very expensive flight across the Atlantic as well as a hotel for the week, and I didn't have a huge budget for vacations back then. If it had been a convention somewhere in Europe, I would have gladly paid up and shown my face and everything, but back then I didn't want to spend that much money, so they booked the trip without me and it looked like they had a great time. That summer, we were getting a new Fire Emblem game, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and everyone was super excited for it. The con looked like it was a great success. After it was over, I continued working with Mangs. I joined him for another Let's Play, his Black Eagles run of Three Houses. I did one of those myself on my own with the Golden Deer routes, and since the both of us were uploading 2 videos every day, that meant I was recording 4 episodes a day. My summer was basically all Three Houses. After the hype died down a bit, Mangs joined me on my channel for what would end up being the last time, my new mystery Wheel of Death playthrough. Near the end of this, Mangs told me he was feeling a bit overworked and that he couldn't afford to spend time co-hosting another playthrough on my channel while also doing double uploads for his own. I thought this was slightly strange since I was recording these episodes maybe once or twice per week and they only took about an hour each, but I didn't begrudge him his free time. I found another great co-host in Bizmix, and he joined me on my playthrough of Shadows of Valentia. This is the beginning of a time where I didn't talk to Mangs nearly as much as I used to. After his first Three Houses playthrough, he switched up co-hosts for his other 2 Three Houses Let's Plays, and he also adjusted his sleep schedule to an American one. So once we were done with the new mystery Let's Play on my channel, there was suddenly much less contact between us. It was a bit of a weird time because we went from talking and recording at least twice a day to talking maybe 2 or 3 times a week. On July 8th, 2020, late afternoon in Europe, morning in most of America, Goosephone, one of the YouTubers that went to Anime North with the group of creators in 2019, posts a tweet longer explaining how Mangs sexually assaulted her during their stay in a hotel room in Canada. This tweet is pretty detailed and I'm not going to read it out word for word. If you want the full story, it's on screen here. You can pause it and read it for yourself, and I will also link to it in the description. Before I get into my own actions and reactions that followed, I want to highlight a couple of passages of that tweet. The first portion of the tweet longer is mostly explaining how Goose and Mangs were friends. There was some sexual tension between the two as well, until Goose told Mangs that she was no longer comfortable with it and she wanted Mangs to stop. And he did. Until they were planning the get-together at Anime North, and Mangs sent a series of sexual messages when he was drunk. Since the plan at that point was for Goose and Mangs to share a room and a bed, Goose expressed concern to Mangs, so he sent this message: "I will not touch you at Anime North." This is a promise that Mangs kept for exactly one night. Goose describes that she woke up with Mangs' dick against her body, him kissing her hair, rubbing her back, and groaning. Goose doesn't know how long he was touching her for while she was asleep, or even the degree of bodily contact prior to her regaining consciousness. Later in the tweet, there are screenshots of Mangs describing what happened in no less than 5 different varieties. If even one of these accounts is true, that means he was misrepresenting what he did the other 4 times. If you can stomach it, I recommend you read the whole tweet and click all the links in it to see how inconsistent and manipulative Mangs is in these messages. The tweet is signal boosted by many other community members, including all of the other Fire Emblem YouTubers from the trip. If you were in any part of the online Fire Emblem community at the time, it was nearly impossible to miss. Afterwards, a lot of other women came out with their experiences with Mangs. There was no assault in those since they were all online. They were more like the story from 2017, where Mangs was using his platform to solicit pictures of them. Most of them were around 2017, although there are more recent cases as well. That night was a painful one for everyone, including me. It came completely out of the blue. I barely knew Goose. I'd only ever seen her occasionally as a guest on Mangs' channel. I remember being completely lost on what to do or what to think or who to talk to. I remember wondering if someone I knew or thought I knew would do all these things. I remember worrying that if I said anything, be it in public or in private to anyone, it would be taken as picking a side. I wasn't involved, but I also felt an immense pressure to say or do something, but I had no idea what would be in the community's best interest. I wanted to do the right thing, whatever was fair, but I also wanted to be safe and not to implicate myself. I thought all sorts of unlikely things. I thought, what if I talk to Mangs and he just tells me what really happened? Am I obliged to tell anyone, like the police or something? At this point in time, I didn't know what was true and what wasn't, and I have to admit, I was more than afraid that whatever choice I made would be used against me. If I full-on back up Goose, I go against someone I considered a true friend, and people will interpret it that way. And if I say anything that can be construed as not outright condemning Mangs, will people think that I'm defending a sexual assailant? And the worst part is, I felt like I couldn't share this with anyone privately, because what if they share it to anyone and put their spin on it? Someone I trusted was just outed as a predator, and things were getting heated everywhere I looked, so how could I tell who I could trust? I ended up writing a short statement, basically saying I don't feel comfortable giving my take right now. We saw Goose's statement, I've known Mangs for a long time, I want to see what he has to say before I make up my mind. I was trying to get both sides of the story. I hated doing it because I knew some people might frame it as me being unwilling to take a stance or unwilling to sever my connection to Mangs, but I really wasn't sure what to do. Even though I'd known Mangs for years, I didn't know any more than most people did, and I thought it was best not to add any more noise. Soon after posting my statements, I went to bed, and I don't think I got more than 2 hours of sleep that whole night. I remember getting up again to scroll through everything, pacing up and down my room thinking, basically just getting lost in everything. I got a lot of messages that night, almost all of them supportive. I want to take a moment again to say I'm really grateful for each and every one of them. They really do help a lot. I also got a couple of slightly disturbing messages from friends of Mangs telling me he was in a bad place. Because of everything that was going down, I wasn't able to process exactly what that meant, but I knew I was not ready to talk to him. It was only later that I realized what kind of bad place they were talking about: depression, thoughts of suicide. I don't remember when exactly it was that it first hit me, but when it did, I messaged him back to tell him not to do anything rash, seek help, and message me that he's okay. This was at 8 in the morning for me. At 8:25, I received a single message in response. Too late. I remember really panicking when I saw that. When I say panic, I don't mean run around or shout or anything, but my hands started shaking. I started second guessing everything I do. In no particular order, I called him on Discord, got no response, got a hold of his real phone number through Cyan, called him on that, no response, and in the meanwhile, Cyan reached out to a real-life friend of Mangs who ended up getting over there in his car. I also tried reaching out a police department in his area, but since I don't speak or understand Norwegian, I wasn't able to reach anyone. I hope it's needless to say, but if you or anyone you know is thinking about self-harm or suicide, do not be afraid to seek out help. I wouldn't have mentioned Mangs' suicide attempt in the video if it wasn't public information already, but since Mangs openly mentioned these events in his own statements at least once, I figured it would be okay to mention here. I can't tell you how much these events shook me or anyone else around either of us. It's impossible to explain, but it's never a solution to anything and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. Thinking about that one reply on Discord where he just went too late still fucks me up to this day. The aftermath of that day and night is that I come back to my decision making every time I'm not fully focused on something else. I take walks outside every day and my mind will constantly wander to these events. I'm also more skeptical and wary of trusting people. After all this, Mangs wrote a statement defending himself that's no longer available on Twitter. Mangs also left another statement saying he would leave the community and seek help. Only after 24 hours after Goose's tweet did I feel comfortable putting another statement out there, explaining why I was hesitant in a little more detail, and I also explained I would no longer work with Mangs even if he did come back. This is also around the time that different allegations regarding another Fire Emblem YouTuber, Chaz Allegations LLC, came to light. However, I would like to keep the focus on Mangs and his channel a little longer before we get to Chaz. So Mangs left YouTube and the Fire Emblem community. Things were still chaotic for the days after wherever I looked, but eventually everything quieted down a bit. Mangs DM'd me later with an apology to me. He wrote a lot of things that I really wanted to believe, but after everything that has transpired right now, I find it really difficult too. I remember being so unsure what to think, so angry that he replied to me with just too late, and of course just being disappointed, to the point where I couldn't bring myself to write anything to him for a month. In the end, what brought me to DM him was that I caught wind of Mangs wanting to return to YouTube. He was writing a script, presumably an apology video, and from there he was planning to resume making content again. So first off, I thought him coming back within a month was tactless. His leaving post had seemed very final. He basically said he might leave forever. A month just felt like him spitting in the face of every one of his victims. But the notion of him coming back at all was just wrong in my opinion. Mangs' conduct made him unfitting to be a content creator, especially on a Nintendo-focused channel towards a younger audience. He had proven himself to be someone you could not trust with the power of a platform like the one he had, time and time again. 2017 was the first time he was caught out, and the first time he promised to be better. And then again in 2020. And that is without mentioning everything I know he has done that I do not want to talk about in public, since it might compromise some of the people he has hurt. With any regular job, you can't be held accountable by your superiors. If you're creating an unsafe working environment anywhere else, like if you're working at McDonald's or at an office or at a school, there are checks and balances in place to take action against you. If you really screw up and willfully harm others, you can get fired. But if you work as a content creator at YouTube, there is no structure in place. The CEO of YouTube is not going to fire someone, not for something like this. They will sometimes demonetize creators who break their terms of service or remove channels, but expecting them to take action for something that happened largely outside of YouTube, that's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. That is really strange when you think about it. Imagine if a teacher was caught having sex with a student, but they would return to a job where they get to interact with children on a daily basis. And then imagine people would find that normal. One could argue that the onus of holding Mangs accountable is on his viewer base. If no one watched his videos anymore because of what he did, then the problem would solve itself. But at this point in time, I did not think that that was very likely. Mangs' fans were showing themselves to be very eager for him to come back, begging him in the comment section of the last video he uploaded. And as I'm writing this, Mangs has gained back the amount of subscribers that he's lost. I'll get back to that point later. My point was, at this time, there was only one person who could hold Mangs accountable. Mangs himself. It was up to him to be the bigger man and fire himself, so to speak. His behavior set a bad example to an impressionable audience, consisting largely of young guys in their teens and 20s, on how to treat other people. If he did not do to himself what a boss would do to him in almost any other line of work, if he allowed himself to walk back into his workplace as if nothing happened, he would show everyone that you could do exactly as he did and get away with it. It would set a very dangerous precedent, and I want to avoid that. Again, I need to stress this. The reason Mangs was able to return has nothing to do with his actions not being abhorrent and illegal. He was allowed to return because YouTube doesn't have a good mechanism to prevent him from coming back. It's basically him getting off on a technicality. So I went to talk to Mangs about how it was good that he left and about how it was up to him to hold himself accountable. I could tell that I was never going to be able to convince him to not come back. All I could do was delay it a little bit and try to get it through to him that he needed to hold himself accountable, that he shouldn't try to blame it on cancel culture. I agreed with some of the things Mangs said that I would not today for 3 reasons. Sometimes because I didn't know any better then, so I went along with the narrative he was presenting. Sometimes it was because I wanted to keep the conversation going and not antagonize him. And sometimes it was because I just wanted to believe he was being honest. I'm not showing these logs in full because I know now that a lot of what is said in here is untrue or irrelevant, not to mention very personal. At the time, I was trying to ensure that if Mangs were to come back, he would at the very least be honest and own up. Looking back at this conversation now, I think I gave in too much. Mangs did eventually make a video called We Need to Talk, which marked his return to YouTube. There is a lot to unpack when it comes to this video, to the point that I'm going to dedicate an entire chapter to discussing it. I've transcribed everything Mangs says in this video. It makes it easier for me to refer to what he has said, and by easier I don't just mean more convenient. I prefer to not hear the sound of Mangs' voice anymore, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. You can find the transcript in the text version of this video, link is in the description. A brief summary. The video is 99% Mangs talking to the camera to explain to his audience what happened at Anime North and in July 2020, and to talk about his plans with his channel going forward. However, in the video, Mangs also talks a lot about the impact of the events on him and his mental health, and discusses how a group of people conspired to take him down. This is the best job I can do in neutrally covering the contents of his video without reading out my entire transcript or editing it into this one in its entirety. If you want to watch it yourself, well, Mangs has privated his version of the video, but someone else has uploaded it on YouTube anyway. If you want to inform yourself on what exactly Mangs said, I recommend you either find a re-upload or read the transcript in its entirety and see what you think. Since Mangs has deleted or privated pretty much everything else related to July 2020 from his channel, it's as close to his side of the story as you can find nowadays. If you are a fan of Mangs, this is the portion of the video that might be the hardest to watch. This is where I am going to start talking about how dishonest Mangs is, about how he frames the entire situation. I'm going to be as honest and as thorough as I can be, and that might be hard to hear. But sometimes the truth is hard to hear. If you are a part of Mangs' fan base, I hope you can keep in mind that my primary goal for this video is to inform the Fire Emblem and Advance Wars communities of the truth, and make it a safer place. It is not a personal attack on you, or even on Mangs. This is purely about Mangs' words and Mangs' actions. There is so much to discuss in this return video, so I'm going to break it down into these elements. The big lie, the conspiracy theory, vague apologies, and manufacturing sympathy, or pity mining. The first outright lie is this.
I was sharing a bed with a girl that I had flirted back and forth with for a long time. A bed that she insisted we share during the convention.
This is demonstrably false. It's proven by the text messages between Mangs and Goose that Goose posted in her TwitLonger. In this screenshot, you can see that Goose invited other people to sleep in their room, and it was Mangs who was not okay with it. Mangs says, "Please don't invite people to sleep in our room." Mangs also says, "This is not about me wanting to be alone with you," and Goose responds with, "Not saying I don't trust you, but when large amounts of alcohol are involved, things are bound to happen." This conversation is very different from how Mangs explains things. Here's how Goose explains the situation. These events are also confirmed by the 5 other witnesses at the convention. During our planning for Anime North, we decided to split a hotel room. A very normal thing to do at a con, right? I suggested the cheapest room option, which happened to be a single bed, not thinking I would be put in any danger. As our plans progressed, some panelists like Pavis and Chaz didn't have a hotel situation solidified yet, so I told them there was space in our room. It's not abnormal for 4 or 5 people to dogpile into a cramped hotel room at cons, and I figured something like this would be the case. Mangs was not on board with this, claiming it was due to his introverted personality and not because he wanted to be alone with me. Let's be real here. Mangs frames this conversation as, "This girl I had back and forth flirting with wanted to share a bed with me." But that's not what this is. It's a girl suggesting they share the cheapest bedroom, perhaps with other people, because that's what you do for a con. Sleeping in one bed is not an invitation to have sex. Goose's reluctance to be in a single bed with Mangs is abundantly clear. "Not saying I don't trust you, but when large amounts of alcohol are involved, things are bound to happen." But if that wasn't clear enough, Goose explains in her twitlonger that Mangs later sent her a series of drunk messages about how he wants to fuck her tits. His phrasing, not mine. This made Goose uncomfortable to the point where she has another, more clear convo with him. This convo is not in her twitlonger in its entirety, but it does have the part where Mangs promises, "I won't touch you at Anime North." There is no room for misunderstandings here. These screenshots completely undermine the narrative that often gets thrown around in defense of Mangs, like, "What did you expect for getting in bed with a guy you flirted with?" She expected to share a bed to sleep in, and for him not to touch her. It's that simple. According to the other witnesses, Goose had fallen asleep in the room the whole group was hanging out in. After being absent for a few hours, Mangs came back from his room on another floor and woke her up so they could go to their own room together, even though some of the others told him to just let her sleep. When he left, apparently Goose was very torn on going back. Overall, she felt if she didn't return to the room, Mangs would make her feel bad about it later on, and she thought she could put her trust in him and his words. That's not what someone would say if they were insisting they share a bed together because they wanted to do anything other than sleep. All of this is said to place some blame and accountability of Mangs' actions on Goosephone. But if you bother to cross-examine for yourself, you will find that what Mangs is saying here is both untrue and illegitimate. I'm disappointed that Mangs said something like this in a video that he claims is him being honest with himself and his audience. This is the biggest and the most important lie in the video, but it is far from the only one. There is also a point where Mangs says that he was half asleep, hungover from the night before. His words, not mine. This matches up 1.5 of his 5 different ways he says he recalls the events in other instances. But it doesn't matter. Being hungover does not dilute your judgment. It's not the same as being drunk. As for being half asleep, that could mean a lot of different things. If he means he wasn't conscious, that doesn't add up either, since in other testimonies, he's recalling very specific things that happened. Another important observation about We Need to Talk is that, like I said earlier, 99% of it is Mangs talking to the camera. There is no proof of anything he says. Goose's account, on the other hand, has all these text message screenshots of conversations with Mangs that are consistent with what she said, and that contradict what Mangs says in We Need to Talk. Mangs is fully relying on people taking his word for it, while ignoring the reality and context of what really happened. Mangs later called what happened a he said, she said situation.
At the end of the day, this is a he said, she said situation. I can deny it as much as I want, but all I have is my word.
but that is a phrase used to describe when there is no proof. In this case, there is proof, and Mangs has admitted to touching Goose without her consent, although he's been vague and inconsistent about exactly how and where he touched her. Mangs also makes a point of saying that what he did was not sexual assault.
However, I will make one defense of myself in this video, and that is regarding the claims of sexual assault. A lot of people were confused when I left. Some people claimed that I admitted to all guilt, which is not the case. In my resignation, I admitted to having problems with women and alcohol, which is true. I admitted to having hurt people, which is also true. But I never admitted to sexually assaulting anyone.
Well, first things first, it was. Sexual assault is unwanted sexual touching. This is not a case of sexual harassment or sexual coercion. This was a physical interaction that happened while she was unconscious. This is a fact that was confirmed by both parties. And while Mangs is deliberately vague about where exactly he touched Goose, it doesn't matter. She wasn't given a choice either way. She was asleep. What bothers me most is this text message where he says, "I could have touched your breasts more." And also this entire convo is honestly disgusting. Mangs bases his defense against sexual assault on the fact that it was never defined to him as such.
Even when we talked about the event after the fact, it was never once described to me as sexual assaults. And we talked about it many times.
Now, just because it was never explicitly said out loud doesn't change what it was. Mangs even told me later that she told me to my face that she did not consider what happened sexual assault, and I think this feeling is what his defense is based on. To an extent, I can even understand that Mangs was surprised and perhaps even upset that suddenly it was called sexual assault. But this confusion should only last as long as it takes you to try and see what happened from Goose's angle. Mangs was her mentor and friend for quite some time now. She trusted him. She wanted to take his word for what happened, that he didn't fully realize what he was doing at the time, that it was a misreading, that he would learn from it and improve, and so on. She was willing to forgive him, and she was willing to try and forget what happened for the sake of their friendship. Even at the con itself, imagine how hard it would be to confront yourself and Mangs about what happened so soon afterwards. How hard it would be to immediately accuse a friend of something this serious. Personally, I don't think I would be able to. Mangs admits in his return video that they discussed what happened many times after the fact. This alone, to me, is proof that carrying that experience was taking a toll on her. Why would she bring it up so many times to him if it did not? Beyond that, there is this DM between her and Lucky Crit, which occurred a full year before she came forward. This really solidifies my empathy for the situation she was put in. Goosephone says, "It's just, if you could keep everything in this community you love the same and not hurt anyone by keeping your mouth shut, or change everything and tell the truth, what would you do?" I know he's trying to improve, but they are right. I am supporting someone who has done terrible things. During all this time between Anime North and July 2020, Goose publicly pretended nothing happened. Not just because it made it easier to cope with for herself, but also for the sake of others. For the community, as to not cause a rift. And for Mangs, who she still saw as a friend despite what he did, and because she didn't want to ruin his career. To a lesser degree, I feel I can also sympathize with a small aspect of the conflict that Goose must have been experiencing. I go back to the first time I defended Mangs from those allegations in 2017. I felt like I owed him at least another chance. I wanted very badly for him to live up to the promise he made to myself and to everyone else that he would improve. Unfortunately, Mangs never lived up to that promise. Ultimately, a string of destructive actions on Mangs' part convinced Goose that she was no longer doing good by keeping her experience to herself. This series of events can't be explained in proper detail without a lot more context, since a lot of it took place in private. That said, it is all well documented, and I will refer back to it later if you want to know what happened exactly. For now, suffice it to say that Mangs refused to support Goose in a vulnerable moment, broke her trust again, and behaved in a very dishonest and manipulative way. That's when she decided she would no longer bear this burden for him and come out with her story. She kept what Mangs did to herself for over a year, until Mangs failed to support her in an incredibly vulnerable moment, while going out of his way to hurt people who actually did support her. I believe the intent of Goosephone and others was not to bring Mangs to justice, to arrest him or whatever. It was simply to prevent him from doing it again. And I can relate to that, since that's the motivation for my video as well. There's a point in We Need to Talk where Mangs talks about a group effort to take him down.
After I left the community, a lot of details behind the accusations came to light. It turns out that this wasn't a series of separate incidents, but rather a coordinated effort to take me down. Screenshots of their group chat where they organized all this got leaked to the public.
The group he's referring to was a support group, where Goose and several other YouTubers would help and support Goose in coming out and telling her story. I was not in this group, but it does include practically everyone who was at Anime North, plus a couple of others. Mangs frames it as some sort of conspiracy to try and take his channel down. Now, first of all, we need to talk about this frame and why it is nonsensical. It worked very well, and a lot of Mangs' defenders use it as a talking point. I recognize it in some of the harassment I get on my channel. But if you understand how YouTube works, you will also understand why I'm so confident calling it a frame.
To this day, I still find that the Fire Emblem community is very small. There's not a lot of prominent big figures, and I definitely hope that over the years, as the Fire Emblem franchise keeps growing, that we get more and more people, that we get more and more content creators, essentially. I mean, some people might think, Mangs, do you really want the competition? I don't really consider it competition. I think having more people making content is always good, because keep in mind, if you have a bunch of people making content, that means that there's more people who are going to discover them, and if they discover them, chances are they might see me, because my videos will pop up in their recommended tab. So having more prominent Fire Emblem content creators is never a bad thing.
For all Fire Emblem YouTubers, it is, or was, beneficial to have Mangs around. First of all, he obviously provides collaboration opportunities. I spent an entire chapter of this video describing just how much the both of us benefited from working together, and in the same way, Mangs has worked with Goose, Chaz, and a lot of other people. Collaborations, provided there is chemistry, make your videos better, and allow your audiences to find each other's channels. Also, due to the YouTube algorithm, the more channels and videos talk about Fire Emblem, the more traffic any of those videos are due to get. If you watch Fire Emblem videos made by Mangs, the algorithm will also recommend videos made by me, or Chaz, or any other FE-tuber every now and then. Even without any collaboration or advertisement by the creators themselves, every Fire Emblem YouTuber benefits from having other Fire Emblem YouTubers being around, just due to the way that YouTube works. I've seen the phrase, they got rid of Mangs so they could be the biggest Fire Emblem YouTubers, but there is no prize for being the biggest Fire Emblem YouTuber. If Mangs left, the next biggest YouTuber would be worse off, not better, because there would be less Fire Emblem videos around, so less chances to get their videos recommended. It's not like a normal business where you would want to eliminate all your competition so you can have a monopoly. For all the bad things you can say about YouTube and the algorithm, it does reward collaboration and cooperation more than it rewards stifling competition.
I don't really consider it competition. I think having more people making content is always good.
YouTube videos are free to watch, and you can subscribe to as many channels as you want. It's not like all the views that Mangs gets would automatically go to other channels. Both sides of this frame are used against Goosephone occasionally and maliciously. Some will say she only used Mangs for views, and some will say she was out to cancel him. If she needed Mangs for views, why would she cancel him? And the same goes for other people in the group. The fact that the people who were closest to him, the people who benefited the most from him being around, were the ones who were holding him accountable, should add to the credibility of their actions, not detract from them, as Mangs attempts to frame here. Nobody had anything to gain from this. Mangs frames Goose's support group as a conspiracy to get rid of him and his channel, as if that was the primary purpose, rather than just supporting Goose, who really needed some friends to help her through a hard time. There is no proof that the group was anything more than that, and Mangs doesn't provide any. He does say that after the fact, one of the members of the group reached out to him to apologize.
Many of them have later been harassed for their involvement in this group, despite having very little to do with it. Those who were the main driving forces behind that group have been exposed for who they are and what they did. And even some of the people who stuck around have later reached out to me in private and offered their apologies. I don't think they deserve to be hounded for this forever.
And right before that, he says this.
Many of them were there without knowing the full story, and I think a lot of them were just there to offer their support.
But everyone in that group did know the full story. Goosephone's evidence was not just DMs of her account, but also Mangs' multiple confirmations that it happened. I agree we should hear from both sides before making a judgment call, but even after hearing Mangs' side, he never provides any context or evidence that would add to his story. He never properly backs up his claim that what he did was anything less than sexual assault. Still to this day, Goosephone's original twitlonger is the full story. Mangs doesn't name anyone, but to my knowledge, the only person from that group who later reached out to him was Stevie, aka Lucky Crit. But it was not to apologize for their involvement in their group or to admit that they didn't know the full story. It was to reach out to him in case he needed help, hoping to help him become a better person. In We Need to Talk, Mangs somehow twists this into Stevie apologizing to him for trying to cancel him. Just like other friends of Mangs, who despite everything were willing to be sympathetic towards him, he uses this sympathy in his own favor to support his own narrative. This is a good example of why trying to resolve things with Mangs in private does not work. He will use your sympathy against you. He did it with Goose, he did it with Stevie, he did it with others that I am not at liberty to divulge, and I know he would do the same to me if I tried again today. The next part is the closest Mangs comes to proving his conspiracy theory.
Later on, when one of their own got accused, they suddenly shifted their standards. Suddenly it was a lot more important to be skeptical, and I guess it wasn't as important to believe all victims anymore. Other people in the community called out this hypocrisy for what it was, and I am very grateful for that.
This refers to the allegations against Chaz, one of the Fire Emblem YouTubers in both the Anime North convention group and Goose's support group, and also one of Goose's closest friends. I will discuss these allegations in a separate chapter later, but right now I want to keep the focus on Mangs. The line of logic that Mangs is following here is something like this. One person in the group was accused himself, and the group defended him. Therefore, the group changed their standards, is hypocritical, and is therefore not credible. This reasoning was a common one around July 2020. A group including Chaz accused Mangs, but then there were allegations against Chaz too. And there were even people who defended Mangs based on this logic. But it doesn't work like that. Mangs and Chaz could both be guilty. Their cases are independent. Chaz didn't affect Mangs' choice to be intimate with his friend while she was sleeping. His credibility in this regard is irrelevant here. Even if you agree with Mangs that the group was out to take him down, even if Chaz is guilty of everything he is accused of, Goose's twitlonger and the screenshots within it are so damning that it shouldn't make a difference to someone trying to decide whether Mangs is guilty or not. Mangs himself did not believe the allegations against Chaz when he first learned of them. He makes that perfectly clear in a group DM with other FVTubers in August 2019. You should read this whole DM, but I think this bit is the most telling. Mangs says, "I'm not on Twitter these days, though I'm not sure if I want to go back there, but I will say that I take your side on this. I'm sorry for not being able to publicly announce it on a platform, but if anyone asks for my opinion, they will hear it." Mangs never went public with this opinion though, and in We Need to Talk, he makes it look as if the allegations just came to light, even though he's been aware of them for over a year at this point. To be fair to Mangs, it's not impossible that he changed his mind on the allegations against Chaz, but it's worth pointing out that his stance on these allegations shifted when it most benefited him. He never spoke out about these allegations that he suddenly believed before he had a reason to discredit Chaz. So far, I've talked about how Mangs is demonstrably dishonest. He bends the truth of the events that happened to put him in the best light possible, often at the expense of others. Instead of taking responsibility, he accuses his accusers of being hypocritical. We Need to Talk also contains some apologies, hence why back in the day it was sometimes referred to as Mangs apology videos. This is how Mangs apologizes.
But in the end, my recklessness caught up with me. And as a result, I've likely disappointed or hurt many of you. All I can offer now are my words. I'm sorry. For those of you not in the loop, on July the 8th, I was accused of sexual assaults by fellow YouTuber and former friend Goosephone from a time we shared a bed together in Canada at the Anime North convention.
My main issue with Mangs' apology in this video is that it's deliberately unclear. He does not get specific about what he did and why his actions hurt people. The only victim he names is Goose, even though there were many other people that he hurts. He acknowledges that these other victims exist. He says,
shortly after her accusation, some other girls came out as well, posting private logs from my pasts, showing flirting, sexting, and other inappropriate messages. This snowballed into people dragging up old statements and offensive jokes I've made over the years, and every dumb thing I've ever said, or every bad thing I've ever done, was dragged out into the public.
But instead of going into detail about what exactly it was that he said and did, he instead talks about how the accusations affected him and his friends and family, instead of how they affected his victims and what exactly he has learned from this. A little later, he says,
I know some of you just want me to come back, to pretend like none of this ever happened and just continue on with business as usual. Show the middle finger to Twitter. Just say, screw you guys, I'm gonna keep doing what I do. And yeah, it's tempting.
The bit where he says, show the middle finger to Twitter is especially worth noting. The implicit message here is, Twitter is out to get me. Not real people who I've hurt, or lied to, or sexually assaulted. He reduces it to a Twitter thing. He also invokes the phrase cancel culture a lot. For example, here.
I know a lot of people joke about cancel culture. I know I do, frequently. But when it actually happens, it's not something to be taken lightly.
Now, this is something I warned him about in our private conversation before he released the video. I told Mangs it is up to you to take responsibility. Do not blame cancel culture. You are the one who hurt people by your actions. It is up to you to owe up to it. You can see it in these logs. Note that this conversation took place before Mangs released We Need to Talk in August 2020. It's the first time we talked ever since July. It was before I found out just how dishonest he was about the whole ordeal. I had just heard he was coming back, and I preferred to stay on speaking terms rather than antagonize him. I thought he would be more open and honest, maybe even redeem himself. I would not have a conversation like this with him today, and I would not entertain a notion such as him being attacked anymore. You can see the influence of this very conversation later on in We Need to Talk.
I could just take zero responsibility and blame everything on cancel culture. But at the end of the day, I don't think this really shows a lot of self-reflection on my part. If I am incapable of taking responsibility for my own actions, what does that prove? If I just point the finger at everyone else and say it's their fault for calling me out, it proves nothing.
Only for him to negate this in the very next sentence.
Now don't get me wrong, I think cancel culture is toxic and destructive, and I think it harms a lot more than it helps. But the truth is that over the years, I have put myself in a position to be cancelled. That's on me.
Probably because of my suggestion, Mangs states that he doesn't want to blame his actions on cancel culture, but his actions do not match his words, as his frame of being cancelled by cancel culture is a constant throughout this video. People who do not know Mangs personally might interpret this tangent as him owning his actions, but if that was the intent, then why even bring it up in the first place? At this point, it becomes clear that Mangs is setting up cancel culture as the phenomenon that caused all of this. That his big mistake was letting himself be vulnerable to cancel culture, and that it was always out there to get him inevitably. Another bit where he talks about his own actions is right here.
Look, I'm not going to make any excuses. Flirting with female fans over the years who latched onto me due to my status as a YouTuber was unhealthy and wrong. The way I treated my first designer, Mina, was unfair to her, and it was inappropriate to our working relationship. Even the way I acted at Anime North in misreading signals was wrong. I make no excuses for any of that.
I will not get into the situation with this designer Mina, because that is a topic I don't know enough about. Instead, I'll link the relevant testimonies in the description. The fact that Mangs doesn't go into it any further is another example of him being very vague about it. He leaves it to the interpretation of his viewers. If you don't know anything about it, you might think he made one inappropriate comment to her. Mina's testimony is a lot more specific, and for that reason, more credible. I cannot speak for every one of these female fans he talks about, but there are logs between him and Goose where he solicits her and explicitly says he wants to use his platform to make her a new figure in the Fire Emblem community. He goes on to attribute my success and Gast's success to himself, and that he sees similar potential in her. In this piece of evidence, it's clear that Mangs is the one doing the latching. He is incentivizing his platform to her. For him, to abstract it as the opposite is unfair to both Goosephone and to his audience, who are currently just taking his word for all of this. To be fair to Mangs, maybe he's not referring to Goose as one of these female fans specifically, but again, that's the whole problem with all of his statements. We don't know that because of the way they are worded. It's left up to our interpretation, and that's not good enough. But I will say that regardless of who these female fans he's referring to are, they deserve better than to be passively belittled in this way. And note that he again reduced his sexual assault at Anime North as misreading signals. And he also says this.
I know my humor can sometimes make me come across as a little creepy or inappropriate, but I am not a person who forced myself on women without their consent. I take no for an answer. I would never sexually assault anyone. All I can do now is just to apologize for what went down and try to learn from this situation so I can be better in the future.
There was no option for Goose to say no. She was asleep. By saying, "I take no for an answer," Mangs defends himself against an accusation that was never made and further illustrates a severe lack of understanding for why he's in this situation in the first place. These are the only bits in all of We Need to Talk where Mangs apologizes. He relies on vague statements to give a general vibe of accountability, but by keeping it that vague, he leaves it open to denying or retconning it later. It also makes it easier for his audience to hear without being put off. There is one final element of We Need to Talk that I want to highlight, and that is the large portion devoted to Mangs discussing the impact of events on himself and his mental health.
So first off, I just want to tell you guys how I've been in the past month and what I've been doing. And I'm not going to lie, the past month has been pretty rough. I've been through a lot of emotions. Lots of stress, anxiety, depression, bad thoughts, the whole deal. It's been pretty hard. I went to therapy. I've gone several times, and it's been very helpful, and I definitely intend to keep going. To those of you who sent me supportive messages during this time, I know I wasn't able to reply to them, but I did read a lot of them, and you have no idea how much they helped me. When I was at my lowest point and everything seemed to suck and I had absolutely no willpower to move forward, those supportive words really helped me pick myself up. And I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Early on, he talks about how twice he came close to committing suicide, but did not thanks to the support of his friends.
I have never before been suicidal. But on the night that this happened, I tried to take my own life. Had it not been for two good friends intervening, Pansegraf, who came up here to spend a lot of time with me, and Jake, who kept in touch via phone, I would not be here today. They saved my life.
How the messages and support of his fans helped him move forward during these difficult times, and also how a lot of messages he got over the years changed the way he viewed his YouTube career.
Back in my early days, I used to think that the only thing my videos could offer people was a laugh and maybe some background noise when they were bored. I didn't consider what I do very meaningful. But these past few years, I've been getting a lot of messages from my viewers. People showing their appreciation for my videos. People saying that my content helped them get through some really difficult periods of their lives. I've gotten messages from a teenager in the hospital who wrote to me saying he was watching my videos while undergoing chemotherapy, and that they were the only thing he had the energy to watch, and the only thing he was looking forward to in the day. A girl from Germany messaged me saying she used to watch my Let's Plays together with her boyfriend, and after he passed away, she would go back and rewatch those same Let's Plays to help her find closure. I've gotten messages from people saying that they were depressed or even suicidal, and that my videos helped them cope with that. One person in my community told me that if I had not uploaded a video on the day he planned to end his life, he would not be alive today. Messages like these completely changed how I value what I do and the work that I put out. I realized that what I do actually matters, that it has meaning to someone out there, and that really opened my eyes.
In isolation, there is nothing wrong with Mangs discussing these things in this video. It's his platform, and there are no rules on what he can and cannot include. But my issue with these portions is that Mangs put them not just in a video with his accounts with regards to the allegations, but right before and after he gives this account. And I'm going to use my platform to criticize his choice to do that. If you choose to give Mangs the benefit of the doubt and view him putting these segments right before and after his defense as simply him being honest, then I'm probably not going to change your mind. However, my point of view is not just someone who has given Mangs the benefit of the doubt once. I've done so multiple times, and I've never seen Mangs live up to it. I have seen Mangs go further and actually take advantage of that benefit from not only myself but of others many times, before, during, and after the incident. This behavior is consistent, and because of that, it's hard for me to see these inclusions as anything but deliberate, calculated, and further proof of this behavior. It's easy to see manipulation as something that comes from a movie villain, instead of someone who is usually just cracking jokes and playing video games on YouTube. But in reality, manipulation is simply when a person says one thing and then does something else. A person who makes it all believable by taking advantage of your best traits, your sympathy, your emotions, and your humanity towards others. It's very natural to feel sympathetic towards Mangs when watching these bits, and that can make you more receptive to his side of the story. So when you're watching Mangs explain just how horrible the events made him feel and how his content helps others, it's worth asking yourself what he's trying to do, how he's trying to make you feel when you watch it, and why it's being included. In this case, the what is distracting his audience from the issue, the how is playing on their emotion, and the why is because he has no evidence to substantiate anything he says. Mangs experiencing stress and depression about July 2020 is not the same as Mangs actually feeling remorse for what he did to his victims. It sucks that he feels bad, and I don't wish these kinds of dark thoughts on anyone. I also don't doubt that everyone involved in this incident struggled with dark thoughts. I genuinely hope everyone is doing better now. But in this case, Mangs' bad feelings are the consequences of his bad actions. They are not evidence of growth, responsibility, or self-reflection. The kind messages that he got from his followers and the fact that Mangs feels like his work has more meaning, that's great for him, but what does it really add to the video? This might sound harsh, but every content creator gets these type of uplifting, positive messages from fans, even people with channels way smaller than mine. I'm not trying to say that they can't make you feel better, because it's honestly the best and most rewarding part of having a YouTube channel, but it's not something that happens exclusively to Mangs, nor does it make up for the damage that his actions caused. It does do a good job of distracting from the issue, however. The inclusion of these anecdotes are used to justify Mangs' swift return to YouTube. The argument that he makes is because his work makes other people happy, he's returning not for his own benefit, but for theirs. Like most of the points in his video, this argument isn't made directly. It's implicit, it's subtle, and the intent can be openly interpreted. But when I talked to him back in August, he made the same argument explicitly. His intent for including these stories cannot be misinterpreted here. He says, "Do you know there's a 13-year-old boy currently in the hospital undergoing chemotherapy who have sent me 10 emails asking me if I'm coming back? Wondering if he'll ever get to see Vision Quest before he dies? There's a 20-year-old girl from Germany who lost her boyfriend. They used to watch my videos together, and now they're the only thing that gives her peace of mind. I've gotten hundreds of heartbreaking mails over the last month. Should I just abandon them because Goose decided that I'm a predator? When I'm clearly not. I have issues and problems for sure, but I don't abuse or assault girls. I will never accept that label. Mangs makes his return look like a wholesome gesture to his most dedicated fans. But if you look into his arguments closely, this is him using their misfortune for another absurd utilitarian argument. Should I stop providing entertainment to these people who need it so much, just because some people on the internet are saying I'm a predator? This strikes me as really unfair, dishonest, and again, incredibly manipulative. In conclusion, if you combine Mangs' vagueness with his framing it as getting cancelled by Twitter, it's very easy for his impressionable audience to read it as him getting unjustified hate for flirting with female fans. Add the conspiracy theory about other VTubers trying to take him down, as well as the bids for his audience sympathy, and Mangs has made it very difficult to see all of this for what it is. A video that's less about honesty, owning up and taking responsibility, and more about spreading a false narrative and doing damage control. To those who say that Mangs has learned from all this, that he's owned up to his mistakes, and that he's a better person now, I hope you understand why this video does not prove that. If anything, it shows the exact opposite. It shows more framing and more of Mangs' habitually manipulative behavior. His reluctance to change or even empathize with others has a rippled impact that negatively affects the Fire Emblem and Advance Wars communities, one that goes beyond his abuse towards women, as I will get into now. After We Need to Talk, Mangs started releasing content again. He had lost a big chunk of subscribers in July and August, but ever since he went back to uploading, he quickly gained it back and then some. In December 2020, he started a new Let's Play series, Project Ember, a fan-made ROM hack to Fire Emblem 6, The Binding Blade, meant to make it a more polished and fun experience. The Project Ember developers are not happy about this. One of them, Amberstorm, makes this clear in a tweet. Hi, member of the PE team here. We in no way endorse Mangs and have actively been working to stop discussion of him on our Discord. However, it is impossible for us to legally control who plays Ember, as we do not hold the copyright for FE6 and therefore cannot perform any DMCA. Today has been quite difficult for us, as none of us support Mangs. However, there is very little that we can actually do with impeding him from playing it aside from actively stating our disdain for him as a content creator, due to Ember's nature as a fan game. I hope you understand. Since I hang out in a server with several of the Project Ember developers, I tried helping them by sending Mangs an email. I wrote, "You decided to start a Project Ember Let's Play against the wishes of its makers. You were told long ago that they did not want you to, and you did it anyway. After you fucked up but came back, you said you would stay out of the Fire Emblem community and do your own thing. That means you don't always get to pick and choose whose work you get to use and make ad money from. If someone doesn't want you to use their work, the decent thing to do is to respect that and to do something else. Everyone is very aware that you have no legal obligation to, but it would be the right thing to do." But Mangs did not feel obligated to respect the wishes of the developers. He posted this on his community tab. "A lot of people are wondering if I am aware that the creators of Project Ember have asked me to not play their hack on my channel. I am aware. So why am I continuing the Let's Play despite their wishes? While I would certainly appreciate their approval, they have no right to dictate who can and cannot play a publicly available hack, especially one that is a modified and derivative version of an already existing official game at that." He also writes, "Videos I upload with my own commentary and gameplay does become my own content. That is the nature of fair use and the concept of transformative content." Mangs doesn't even acknowledge that not playing the hack against its maker's wishes would be a decent thing to do. He goes straight to a defense about his legal right to play it because his commentary makes it transformative. But this was never about the legalities of the situation. It was an appeal to his morality and maturity to not play something made by someone else on his channel when they do not want him to. It goes beyond doing something without permission. They are explicitly telling him no, and he just ignores them because he can. Mangs deservedly got a lot of heat from the larger Fire Emblem and modding community, and as a response he promised to donate the ad revenue he made off the playthrough to charity. Many people felt conflicted when this happened. At least he's doing something in return, right? But it doesn't rectify the damage his actions caused, or make its implications okay. It doesn't fix the situation or accommodate the people he's taking advantage of. It's just another red herring that misleads the audience and distracts from the original issue of ignoring someone's wishes. I know from experience that ad revenue is not the only benefit of posting videos. By playing Project Ember, Mangs gained subscribers and tractions in the YouTube algorithm. His monetary benefits exceed the ad revenue he made. In the end, he still made money playing someone else's work, and most importantly, he did so in defiance of their wishes. I remember this whole ordeal made me really angry. After all this time, Mangs was still negatively affecting the community that I am a part of. I disliked the fact that he had returned. Like I said before, I felt like it was a slap in the face to everyone he had hurt. But at least, if he was sticking to his own little island within the community, he could be mostly ignored. But here he was, keeping his foot in the door, completely unnecessarily inserting himself into yet another controversy, because he insisted on playing Project Ember. I considered making a video like this one all the way back then, but I did not want to give Mangs more attention than he already had. This is the same reason why I didn't make any kind of public statement about this issue in the first place. If I signal boosted the concerns of Project Ember, I would also inherently signal boost Mangs, and I wanted to avoid that. Eventually, I came up with a more positive approach. I collaborated with the Project Ember development team and a large number of other Fire Emblem YouTubers to host a charity stream, where we would all play all of Project Ember in one go. It ended up lasting a massive 30 hours, and we raised $5,000 for Futures Without Violence. The idea was to showcase the hack, do something positive to start the year 2021, and to give the people a quality Project Ember Let's Play to watch that was not by Mangs. That last part was silent. We didn't mention him a single time during the entire stream. We focused completely on the qualities of Project Ember and the charity. The stream VOD is unfortunately not watchable since, as I learned later, YouTube cannot render streams that are over 12 hours long, but it was a fantastic experience all around and I will never forget it. If I could use a method like this to try and combat Mangs' influence on the Fire Emblem community today, I would. But in the end, I still decided that this video is a necessary evil. It will inevitably draw some attention to Mangs' channel, and I'm sure I will lose subscribers and face harassment. But at this point, it's more important that everyone sees where I stand on this issue that still negatively affects myself and the community that I love every day. Playing Project Ember against the wishes of those who made it is far from the worst thing that Mangs has done, but it is another example of his behavior after his return. His actions do not match his words. Much like the story of his content helping a boy with cancer, the charity is a facade that makes Mangs appear charitable even when he is acting exclusively in his own interests. Playing Project Ember is the last of Mangs' actions that this video will cover in detail. I have more private examples of Mangs' manipulative behavior after We Need to Talk, but for the sake of privacy, I'm not going to share them unless the people involved speak up. If they do, I will happily signal boost them, assuming they are credible. Until then, for me personally, they are further evidence of his unchanged ways. Now that I've gone over Mangs' history, it would be natural to get into the present and the future. Where are we now as a community, and where do we go from here? But first, I should address a part of it that I've sidelined in order to keep this video focused. Chaz, also known as Chaz Aria LLC or Chubby Choosy, is one of the Fire Emblem YouTubers that attended the Anime North convention, along with Mangs, Goosephone, Lucky Crit, Fargast, and Pavis. He was also one of Goose's supporters throughout her coming out about Mangs' sexual assault on her. In July 2020, Chaz faced allegations of sexual misconduct as well. One set from a girl named Monica that was quickly proven false, and then another one from a girl named Indy. As I described before, these accusations were wrongly used to discredit the allegations against Mangs, even though they are unrelated. Mangs' guilt or innocence cannot be correlated to Chaz's guilt or innocence, but due to the community's collective desire for resolution, the public opinion was generally that they were both guilty. After the allegations, Chaz took a break from the Fire Emblem community. However, he did return to upload a video called Absolutely Everything, Indy, Mangs, and Monica, where he discusses these subjects over the course of nearly 100 minutes. My video is focused on Mangs because I have a better perspective on Mangs. I have a shared history with him on YouTube. I collaborated with him. I knew him better as a person. Chaz and I have been in a number of videos and streams together. We were on friendly terms, but my contact with him was always incidental, whereas I talked to Mangs daily. In addition, I am less familiar with Indy than I am with Goose, and while Goose's sexual assault happened in the context of a group of Fire Emblem YouTubers meeting up, pretty much all of Chaz and Indy's interactions happened in private between the two, either in real life or through media like Discord, so I don't have nearly as much to go off of. What I do have is what was posted in public, most importantly, Indy's TwitLonger and Chaz's final response video. For the sake of transparency, I am willing to give my thoughts on the allegations against Chaz. However, I really need to stress that for the reasons I just mentioned, my point of view on the situation is that of an outsider. If you want to inform yourself, your best bet is to read Indy's TwitLonger and watch Chaz's video, and see where you stand. Ideally, you should do this before you hear my take on it, because chances are, if you hear my opinion first, you might find yourself watching it with my perspective in mind. So you could pause this video to look into this, or skip the rest of this part about Chaz. Timestamps are down below. I realize not everyone watching this video has the time or energy to look into a whole different set of allegations about a different YouTuber, but this is the only fair way I can represent it without detracting this video from its main focus. Even if you are not interested in the allegations against Chaz, I would recommend to everyone to watch at least a portion of his video about Mangs. He discusses the situation from another perspective and zooms in on some aspects that I did not. Most importantly, the sequence of events that convinced Goosephone that she needed to come out about Mangs' abuse. This is the string of destructive actions that I referred to earlier. The first time I saw the Chaz allegations, I just was not ready for them. I was still trying to make sense of everything to do with Mangs. I had no idea what to think of Chaz. Indy's TwitLonger accuses him of coercing her into having sex with him, insisting on having sex without protection, and even of prying her legs open. At this point, I was also experiencing fatigue, and I was unable to process everyone else's takes on the situation. I was reading every TwitLonger and long post about it, while also watching every video that came out at the time. Every time I read someone's perspective, I found myself wanting to agree with it. It's very easy to be swayed when you're not entirely informed on a subject or situation, especially in a long format with one point of view. This is something I still experience to this day. Even when I rewatched Mangs' return video, I found myself wanting to take his word for what he says, finding some sympathy for his part of the situation. It makes a difficult and complex situation even harder to grasp, and in the case of Chaz, I was even less informed than I was of Mangs. Chaz's immediate responses to the allegations on Twitter were, in the places where I looked, not well received. Commonly, they were called insufficient, flippant. Like I mentioned before, he left social media and mostly stopped uploading on YouTube. When he shared his perspective in Absolutely Everything, I watched it the same day. And this was in October 2020, which was also when Mangs had started uploading again, which bothered and distracted me a lot. After 100 minutes of listening to Chaz, I felt I was no closer to knowing what had been going on. I still wasn't 100% sure if Chaz was guilty or not, and that really bothered me. Recently, before I started writing this script, I rewatched his video. I had had a lot of time to reflect on everything and a lot more headspace to process what was actually being said. I cannot do this perspective justice through summarizing it, and I just can't stress enough how much you have to check both Indy's and Chaz's perspectives yourselves with a clear mind to understand the full picture. But to make it easier to follow, here is how I understand it. Indy and Chaz met online through Facebook back when Chaz had a small following. They met each other in real life and encountered issues in their relationship due to a lack of proper communication. They did get together, and this is where their stories diverge. Where Indy describes Chaz as coercive and the sex as him prying her legs apart at some point, Chaz talks about how every step of the way he asked Indy for consent.
For Indy, I asked for consent when it came to holding her hand, for kissing, for coming back to my place, for her to undress herself, and for sex. I was not under any impression at the time that she was uncomfortable with what was happening.
When two people's accounts of an event are in conflict, it is very difficult as an outsider to infer which one of them is speaking the truth. But what you can do is look at the consistency of accounts of both parties. If one person gives multiple different accounts of the events, in other words, if they've changed their story, it makes them less credible, especially if they don't acknowledge it. There are also receipts of Indy describing the experience positively afterwards, not just to Chaz, but also to her friends in private. Conversely, Indy's account says she contacted her friends after the fact to seek comfort, but does not contain any receipts of that. I don't really know why she wouldn't include that. Any receipts at all would be pretty substantial towards her story if they existed. But I would also be skeptical if they were presented at this point because Indy has already been caught doctoring some of her evidence. However, there is a lot more to Chaz's video than just his accounts of the sex with Indy. Chaz's video is extremely thorough in its telling of his history with her. Where Indy posted snippets of her private convos with Chaz, Chaz often shows the entire conversation with context that often paints the snippet in a different light.
For example, this explicit conversation she utilizes to showcase what a monster I am for making what appears to be an off-color joke. In reality, the tone of this conversation was both initiated and reciprocated by her. In her allegations, she deliberately cuts off both ends of the chat at the exact points where she could be held accountable, and just shows my response in the middle, as if it were completely unprompted by her. She presents it to her readers and condemningly asks the question, "Why would you ever say something like that?" Even though she clearly knows the answer.
His video makes a case for Indy logging and recording her conversations with him as they were happening with the actual intention of canceling him.
Indy went from this message of closure to #cancel Chaz Aria LLC in the span of a week. As I keep saying, Indy has the right to change her mind whenever. But when the catalyst for that change is us breaking up, it's hard for it not to come off as anything other than reckless. For those of you who are wondering why I don't settle what should have been a private matter privately, or return her attempts to reach out to me, I tried that before all this happened. Unfortunately, we're way beyond that point now. There's too much evidence that Indy was recording my phone calls, clipping, editing, and sharing my DMs, even as the relationship was unfolding. There's too much evidence that she has planted informants in my socials, monitoring me, with the intent to entrap. I should not have this person reaching out to me months after our relationship ended, with cryptic text messages saying she's now somehow aware of my current location. I should not have to worry about the people I interact and associate with being pursued by her. These actions are the definition of stalking. Really, the most unsettling thing to me is a lot of these screens were taken the day these conversations took place, and it showcases that she'd been collecting, saving, and presumably sharing chat logs for the entire duration of our relationship, even before our first physical interaction. I'm not going to assume what the motivation is behind someone doing that, but I still don't personally understand why they would in the first place.
The video also explains the perceived hypocrisy of Goose's support group. You might remember that Chaz, Goose, Lucky Crit, and several others were accused of being quick to defend one of their own when Indy posted her allegations against Chaz. The reason was that July 2020 was the second time that Indy had accused Chaz. She had accused him before, and Goose and the others, having gone through the evidence for and against Chaz before, had decided that Indy's allegations were not credible.
I understand why people who are viewing this fiasco from the outside perceive their actions as antithetical to their words of supporting victims. To people who were uninformed, it looks like they pulled a 180 and tried to silence a victim. But no, that was already happening before anyone even got there. This is Indy's second time coming forward with the same allegations. These people already had their moment of taking Indy's claims seriously. When she came forward the first time, they already took the time to listen to her voice and then listen to mine before jumping to a conclusion. Based on that information, they felt that Indy wasn't credible over a year ago. These are the same allegations. They don't have to go through the same process again to reach the same conclusion. You can rationalize a narrative that their actions are hypocritical, but these people looked at this tweet and knew that Indy was lying through her teeth about events pertaining to myself and Byleth. They just came out of an arduous emotional struggle with the goal of trying to create a positive space out of an awful situation. The residual damage from Mangs' actions on this community still needed to be processed by everyone. It's been less than a day at this point.
So when Indy posted her allegations for a second time in July 2020, they did not need the time to critically go through every piece of evidence, as they had already done so. Other than the context and timing of the second set of allegations, there was no new information or evidence that they needed to examine. They were also reacting to statements that Indy made, which discredited a victim she collaborated with a year before. Chaz was able to prove in this video with evidence that these statements Indy made were demonstrably false. So, in this way, their immediate outrage and response was consistent. Now, I really need to stress this. This entire sequence of events comes from Chaz's perspective video. From what I've been able to see, it makes sense. I'm not aware of a response to this video by Indy or anyone else involved. If someone can verify or falsify the events as Chaz claims they are, I really hope they do so. Also, it's worth repeating that Mangs did not believe the allegations against Chaz when he first learned of them. He stated as such in this group DM with other VTubers. I went over this in the section about Mangs' return video, but I think it's worth emphasizing here because it shows the consistency of Chaz's account. It proves that many people were already informed and aware of Indy's allegations when they were first made in 2019, and thus why they acted accordingly when they resurfaced. But not Mangs, who acted in his own interest instead. Mangs changed from "I will say that I take your side on this" in 2019 to this in 2020.
Later on, when one of their own got accused, they suddenly shifted their standards. Suddenly it was a lot more important to be skeptical, and I guess it wasn't as important to believe all victims anymore. Those who were the main driving forces behind that group have been exposed for who they are and what they did.
Chaz's absolutely everything is different from Mangs' We Need to Talk in almost every way. Where Mangs' words are ambiguous, vague, and unsupported by evidence, Chaz's accounts are firm, detailed, and almost always accompanied by chat logs that support his claims or add context. Where Mangs' video gives the perception of accountability, Chaz's video radiates accountability. Chaz also specifically acknowledges what he thinks he did wrong and what he did to improve. He shows real self-reflection on his words and his actions.
I responded with my own statement, in which I attempted to address the accusation against me as adequately as I could without blaming my accuser. It was not written to be strictly a defense of myself or to make myself look good in the public eye. That wasn't my intent. I wanted it to give my consistent perspective, provide ample evidence to support that perspective, and hold myself accountable for where I went wrong, where I can improve, and where I have improved since my relationship with Indy over a year ago. I wanted to give people who were willing to read my side of the story an opportunity to make up their own minds based on evidence, not emotion. However, there was one glaring omission to my statement, which I am now aware of, and that is an apology. Not just to Indy, but to everyone who had to read through this screenshot and saw a person that they were disappointed in. Believe me, as I said in my first statement, I am too. In this conversation, I pushed the option of staying in a double hotel room when she had clearly communicated to me that she was not okay with the idea of planning to share a room before meeting me in person. I'd like to think that I have enough decency to know that going back to someone's place doesn't automatically imply sex. However, what I should have understood in that lapse of judgment is that I'm not everyone. For many people, and especially someone who is going on what is essentially a blind date, this can be an incredibly high-risk situation. I take for granted that I can walk down the street, go grocery shopping, or use public transportation by myself and not have to worry about my safety in performing these otherwise mundane activities. However, for many women, it's unfortunately commonplace that these scenarios present the risk of being pursued, harassed, or much, much worse. This is the culture and climate we currently live in, and I don't stand behind it at all. But my words in that DM don't reflect that I'm aware of that, and I am both sorry and ashamed for it. Her defensiveness and suspicion of feeling like she's being used is completely valid here. I hope that Indy knows that I'm sorry about this, and that she remembers me apologizing for the way I acted then, my last night that weekend where we talked face to face about our words and the intentions behind them, her sudden but justified defensiveness, and my lack of consideration for her safety.
He takes the time to acknowledge the perspective of others and not just his own.
According to both sets of Indy's allegations, this question specifically was interpreted by Indy as me insisting. Likewise, in her account, every instance of me directly asking for her consent is also framed as insisting, and implies that I was pressuring her with malicious intent. Upon further consideration and personal reflection, I think if my asking of her consent honestly did make her feel this way, then it's valid. In my mind, asking for consent is just that, permission and acknowledgement from your partner. But from her perspective, I can understand why being asked for consent more than one time as the night progresses for each step of intimacy can stop looking like bullet points and start to be interpreted as pressure. Even though it couldn't be further from my intention, I have realized that outside of this interaction with Indy, I have inadvertently done this with other partners. This is an area of communication and boundaries that I 100% acknowledge can be improved on my part. Does this mean that Indy was forced into consenting with me? No. Does this mean that the graphic over-the-top depictions of me and my character and her allegations are true? Absolutely not. But I would still like to apologize either way. I acknowledge how being asked for consent more than once can be perceived as pressure, and I'm sorry for not being more aware of that sooner. It can create a situation where a person who has consented to so many smaller requests feels pressure to continue consenting, even to a request that they are not comfortable with.
While both Chaz and Mangs cast doubts on the intentions of their respective accusing parties, Chaz doesn't use it to hand-wave the accusations. Chaz gives a detailed description of the events and acknowledges that he has no further evidence towards what happened that night in the hotel room.
It's at this point that I really can't provide any concrete evidence of what happened for the rest of that night, because there is none. I can recount my story from my original statement, I can point out the inconsistencies in Indy's accounts, I can say that I know myself enough as a person that I am not capable of the grotesque things she's accusing me of doing. She has her story, and I have the chat logs.
Instead, he adds context and builds credibility for all the events surrounding it. Mangs, to this date, has given all these different accounts and excuses for what exactly he did to Goose. His video did nothing to add to the story that Goosephone already told, except for attempting to rewrite the definition of sexual assault. He also fails to acknowledge all the other cases of abuse towards the other girls that accused him with their own evidence. Now, Chaz does dedicate a significant portion of his video to his involvement in supporting Goosephone, and therefore to Mangs. At the time of publishing his video, I can understand why he got a lot of criticism for doing this. It was seen as Chaz trying to distract from the accusations against himself. But I've always disagreed with that take. Chaz originally addressed the allegations by himself in a twitlonger, but ironically was overwhelmed with criticism because he didn't go over the events of July 2020. But either way, Chaz starts the video with his own mistakes, making sure everyone sees it. Aside from a brief introduction, there is no padding before, and he only gets into Mangs after addressing the Indy allegations for 37 minutes. It's impossible to miss, even if you don't watch the video all the way through. All the segments are partitioned clearly and could be their own video separately. The portion about Goose and Mangs comes up naturally, when Chaz is going over each of the allegations he was involved in chronological order. Since the way Chaz handled each of these allegations influences how he acted in the next, it made sense to include. But the most important thing is, not a single time throughout the video does the Mangs portion interfere with the rest of it. Chaz never uses Mangs as an excuse to discredit his accuser. After all, Mangs and Indy have nothing to do with one another. The Mangs portion is in there to explain Chaz's actions online during July 2020, and to show the inconsistencies in the accounts that Mangs gave. Chaz was both a witness and a victim of Mangs' abuse, with a substantial amount of key evidence that was never shown previously to support his account. All of these are valid reasons to include them in this type of video. There is one last part of absolutely everything that I want to highlight as a personal aside, called A Message to FETubers, a video made by another Fire Emblem YouTuber, Deltre.
People were understandably confused by the storm of allegations being tossed around for the past week. A YouTuber named Deltra made a piece of content in particular that hit all the boxes for the vulnerable state of the Fire Emblem community at that time. It was angry, emotional, and searching for rationalization.
Deltre was not in the circle of people supporting Goose, nor was he at the Anime North convention. He has been on mine and Mangs' channel maybe 3 times total, so as July 2020 goes, he is an outsider, but one with a platform. I mentioned in the introduction that perspectives of neutral parties can be inaccurate, since they operate on less information than people who are involved. They rely on secondhand information, but since they aren't necessarily aligned with either the accused party nor the accuser, they can be seen as more objective, and thus more attractive to other outsiders looking to inform themselves. And that was what Deltre's video was to me at first, someone with a clean perspective. I was really happy to see it, I took it at face value, and I left a supportive comment. That was a mistake on my part, because I also have a significant platform, so it gave Deltre credibility that I had no right to give him, and he had no right to have. Chaz's video shows how misinformed some of Deltre's takes are, and how most of the facts he presented were merely assumptions that were dressed as such. I was really captured by the emotion that Deltre puts in this video, more than his actual message. He speaks very angrily, which matched my frustration with the situation at hand.
With everything that's happening in the world, much less this community, it's insane to think that your own personal struggle somehow outweighs the situation that presents itself before you. Tell yourselves all you'd like that you're just non-confrontational, but that's cowardice by another name.
Deltre appeared to provide resolution to a problem that so far had gone without one, even though he was unintentionally increasing the amount of misinformation. I've been in Deltre's position, and I heavily empathize with his anger in this video. I remember being immensely frustrated with the situation at hand, and also remember being frustrated with myself for having some degree of power, but not knowing how to use it. I know that if I post something, a lot of people will read it, agree with it, and maybe even take action just because I say it is the right thing to do. Every moment where I had the power to maybe change things for the better but didn't do so felt like a waste, and this feeling is part of my motivation for making this video. Chaz says in absolutely everything that he doesn't think Deltre is a bad person for making the video, and I agree. At the same time, a message to FETubers is a lesson for all of us, me included, that sometimes it is better for everyone to wait and do nothing than it is to present facts that turn out to be nothing more than misinformed assumptions, which ultimately end up harming innocent people. I've done my best to ensure that this video does not make the same mistakes, that everything I say is either supported by evidence or clearly defined as my point of view. You are more than welcome to hold me accountable, to point out if something I say is factually wrong if it turns out that way. But I am more informed on the situation than most people, and if you want to point out a fault in what I'm saying, I ask that you provide more evidence than just hearsay from an outsider. Now, when it comes to Chaz and the allegations raised against him by Indy, a subsection in this video is not even close to enough to discuss them in full. I'm including them because these allegations are a huge part of the storm in the Fire Emblem community that happened in July 2020. But as I said before, they are ultimately inconsequential when you're looking at Mangs and his credibility against Goose and hers. In Mangs' case, Chaz is simply one of the many witnesses to the events at Anime North and a supporter of Goose, but all the relevant evidence is in the accounts of Mangs and Goose themselves. I made this section not to compare Chaz and Mangs, but to contrast them. They are two different cases with different people in completely different circumstances. That does not mean that the allegations against Chaz don't matter in the grand scheme of things. They were every bit of impactful as the one against Mangs, and in both cases, the only way to find out how much truth there is to the allegations is to read both sides of them, and then infer which one of them is more consistent and more plausible, and come to your own conclusions. That's it. There has been so much noise, framing, and misinformation around both sets of accusations, but at the core, hearing both sides is all we as a community can do. It's what I've done in the case of Mangs, and it's what I've done in the case of Chaz. I thought Indy's account was horrifying, and I found it hard not to believe her during July 2020. But after rewatching absolutely everything and rereading her tweet longer, her account looks like the less credible between the two. Looking at the situation honestly, there are so many times Indy left out relevant context from her screenshots or misled people into supporting her. To me, it's clear that Indy's word alone is not credible, and because her word is the only thing supporting the accusation at this point, I don't believe Chaz is a felon. I obviously can't make an assessment with certainty on a situation where neither party confirms what happened on that specific night. However, the evidence that Chaz did provide, including the additional context around Indy's screenshots, proved to me that at the very least, the situation was not predatory. Now, I'm keeping in mind that all of Chaz's video is still one side of the story, told by someone charismatic, and that it's very easy to get tunnel vision as you're listening to it. It's also important to take into account that this video got the last word in. As far as I am aware, Indy never had or took the opportunity to raise counterpoints, to address the instances where she was being demonstrably dishonest, or to answer any of the questions raised in absolutely everything. I do believe their relationship had serious communication problems, which likely contributed to their falling out, and to Indy's feelings and actions after the fact. And despite everything, I don't doubt that Indy was feeling real hurts that motivated her into doing what she did. Chaz acknowledges all these things, shows how he has reflected on what he believes he did wrong, and offers a clear and detailed apology. That's why you won't hear me say Chaz has done nothing wrong. But I will repeat, I don't believe Chaz is a predator, and I don't believe he forced himself on Indy. That is my POV on Chaz's POV. Now that I've gone over the most important history from 2017 to present, I think it's time we take a look at the state of the community now and where to go from here. It has been over a year since July 2020, and for most people, it might feel like an over and done with affair. For those who are not directly affected, this video might feel like it brings up something that has long since been resolved, like it tears open an old wound that had already healed. But for some people, these events still affect them every day. The most obvious examples are Mangs' victims, not just Goose, but also other women that came out with their stories during July 2020, and there are a lot of them. I know Goose has to deal with people harassing her online every day on social media and in her comment section. I don't know how much that applies to Mangs' other victims, but I know there was plenty of harassment for them too when they first posted their allegations. While I don't consider myself an abused victim of Mangs', I still deal with July 2020 on some level on an almost daily basis. I get harassment on my channel too, generally along the lines of, "You're a snake for abandoning Mangs." A little while after July 2020, there was someone repeatedly donating super chats on my stream, with jokes about how Crom walked in on Robin taking a bath and how he should be cancelled for it. When I uploaded Fire Emblem 7 PvP for the first time, I got all kinds of comments from people saying I stole Mangs' content. I didn't even know he had done the same thing at the time, and Mangs had only made one video like this around 3 months before I made mine. I don't have any of these comments anymore since they got caught in a filter and deleted automatically, but it was more than a handful. However, the best example of how this affects me and my channel is when I uploaded a video featuring a Fire Emblem in Advance Wars hack. I did this at the request of the maker of the hack, who had requested Mangs to do the same. I got so many comments talking about how I was stealing his content or just a bunch of general misinformation about July 2020. I've noticed that many of the individuals inciting these types of arguments are moderators on Mangs' channel. It doesn't help that despite everything, YouTube still links my channel with Mangs' so that I run into him when checking my analytics, for example. And this is just what's visible. Personally, I find myself thinking of July 2020 very regularly, basically every time I'm not heavily focused on something else, like recording or editing videos. When I'm taking a break from my screen and taking a walk outside, or when I'm trying to write a script for my video, it's really distracting. It takes up a lot of my headspace, and I can't imagine that I'm the only one who goes through this. And that is why I wanted to make this video, even though it's been so long. I can assure you that I would much rather have spent the time and energy writing, recording, and editing this video on something fun and something relaxing, something Fire Emblem related. It would probably be more beneficial for my channel's growth, but I want to get all this off my chest and get across just how unfair this entire situation is, and I want to help fix it. Now Mangs, he has successfully erased this bit of his own history. He has wiped the community tab posts talking about it, and he put We Need to Talk on private. As far as I know, the only other reference he's made to the event since then is a joke about cancel culture in one of his Let's Play episodes.
Oh yeah, I canceled him. Woo! Now you know what it feels like. Gotta fish up his old statements. Shame him.
Mangs is in the same position he was in before July 2020. He has a large, impressionable subscriber base which he can reach and interact with through his YouTube videos and his live streams. He might have left Twitter under the guise of wanting to leave social media for his mental health, but YouTube is also social media, and he's also still using Discord and other forms of social media to organize collaborations, moderators and designers for his channel, and get modders for his ROM hacks. Many of these individuals that I am aware of are incredibly young, some are even underage. Even though a large portion of the community has rejected Mangs, he is still in the same position that enabled his behavior in the first place. For Mangs' channel, July 2020 is a thing of the past. He has largely moved on to Advance Wars, where he has no one of his size or popularity. This gave him access to an entirely new fan base in addition to the Fire Emblem one he already had. Advance Wars boosted Mangs' channel by tens of thousands of subscribers, likely helped by the incoming release of Advance Wars Reboot Camp. But make no mistake, he has not retired from Fire Emblem content. He still plays Fire Emblem on his channel regularly, and I have no doubt that if a new Fire Emblem game was announced tomorrow, he will be there to cover it and reach tons of new potential subscribers that way. People who were not around in the community during July 2020, who will have no idea what Mangs is capable of. If Mangs will not hold himself accountable, and if YouTube itself will not do that for him, then the only remaining option is for the communities he is in to do so. That goes not just for the Fire Emblem community, but also the Advance Wars community, and any other community that he moves on towards. Mangs' large fanbase is a huge part of what gives him the power to abuse others. It is these fans who harassed Goose when she came out with her story, harassed Chaz when he publicly supported Goose, and harassed me for not working with Mangs anymore or making Advance Wars videos. It is these fans that he used to gain sympathy in We Need to Talk. It is all these fans that put 100k subscribers next to his name on YouTube that make him one of the faces of the Fire Emblem and Advance Wars communities. Even if you only watch his content without subscribing to him, you are boosting his videos for the YouTube algorithm. His YouTube fame turns him into an example for people who identify with him, and makes his side in the situation appear more legitimate. It makes it easier for Mangs to mislead new fans over a situation where he acted in a predatory way, and it helps him discredit the experience of the women who came out against him in the past. Not only that, but it also bolsters the argument that you can do the things that he has done, lie about it, and come back even larger and stronger, as if there are no consequences because it's the internet. And this sets a dangerous precedent for a younger and more impressionable audience. This goes double for those who actively support Mangs in making videos, like collaborators, designers, and editors. By working with or for Mangs, they facilitate and enable him so that he can reach more people. They normalize him as a figurehead of the community, and they undo the efforts of his victims and their supporters. For that reason, I will not work with anyone who also works with Mangs. I've always been happy to feature other channels on mine. I've provided voice lines, I've made appearances for interviews, or had people on for videos on my channel, like Fire Emblem 7 PvP. And like I've laid out before, competition is not an issue on YouTube, since the algorithm rewards everyone within the Fire Emblem sphere, the more people make Fire Emblem content. In the past, I would only refuse cooperation if I simply didn't have the time, but now I will not associate with anyone who helps in establishing Mangs' presence on YouTube, and I encourage every other content creator to do the same. I've already had several tough conversations about this with potential contributors, and I'm not afraid to have more. Before I end this video, I want to make a distinction here and be as clear as possible. I am not making these statements because I hate Mangs. I don't hate Mangs. But I am angry and disappointed because of what he has said and done, and I want him to do his part to undo the damage that he has caused. I'm sad that our years of working together ended like this, and I miss our friendship. If I felt like it was the right thing to do, if I felt like Mangs really properly redeemed himself, I would try to repair it today. But I don't feel that way. He has never owed up to the inconsistencies, the lies, and the abusive acts I have gone through in this video. He has not shown that he has reflected on them or learned from any of them. If his reaction to this video is an honest and respectful attempt at doing so, that could be a good first step. However, it's also possible that Mangs continues down the path of dishonesty, framing, and deflection. If that is the case, and if we want our online communities to be safe in the future, then it is not enough to simply ignore Mangs' presence, to just not talk about him. In fact, it's counterproductive. We should keep the conversation going until he's finally able to provide closure for those he harmed. Until then, myself and his community will unfortunately be forced to continue to deal with the fallout of his actions and lack of accountability. People will always find their way to Mangs' channel eventually if they are interested in what he is making, but the least we can do is make sure that his name is associated with what he has said and done, and what he has never taken accountability for.